Hello, this is Frank Allen of Davis High School going over the exam that students took for Unit 4. This is Unit 4 exam, and we're going to cover each individual question. If you come in to take a retest, you will have questions that are similar, but the information in the answer choices will be different. For instance, the question here, number 1, you have to identify each bond, whether it's ionic or covalent. So instead of using calcium and chlorine, I might mix this up and use sodium and oxygen. But the premise for number 1 is that you know the difference between ionic and covalent. And so the retest will follow the same concept for each question. Question 2 on the retest will ask you about which elements are metals or which elements are nonmetals, and so forth. Alright, so let's get started. You'll need a periodic table out, and I encourage you to pause at each question and see if you can answer it, and then turn the video back on and get the correct answer and the justification for the answer. Which table correctly identifies each bond? So basically you have to know the difference between an ionic bond and a covalent bond. Ionic bonds are made of metals and nonmetals. Covalent bonds are made of two nonmetals. So if you're looking at the periodic table, you would see that calcium and chlorine are a metal and a nonmetal, so this is accurate here. Carbon and chlorine are two nonmetals, so that would be a covalent bond, so that rules out answer choice A. You essentially do the same for every single one of these, and you're going to find that answer choice C, I believe, is the correct one. Mg and Cl, that's a metal and a nonmetal, correct. Ionic. Potassium and bromine, metal and a nonmetal, correct. Ionic. Chlorine and chlorine, two nonmetals, so C would have been the correct answer for that question. Which elements are metals? Looking at your periodic table, remember your periodic table, nonmetals are on the right, metals are on the left. The exception to that is hydrogen. It's a nonmetal. So using your periodic table, which elements are metals? The answer is going to be C. Which of the following compounds has the lowest melting point? To answer this question, you need to have a full understanding of your IMFs. We have a video on IMFs. You probably need to watch that. There are 4 types of IMFs: ionic, hydrogen forces, polar and nonpolar forces. These 3 forces occur when you have a covalent compound. That's a nonmetal and a nonmetal. And there are some particulars that make something polar or nonpolar. We'll get into that. And ionic is a metal and a nonmetal. So basically you've got 2 large groups of compounds, ionic and covalent. And within the covalent class you can have 3 types of IMFs. So the question reads, which of the following compounds has the lowest melting point? Well, this one, first thing you need to do is decide which one of these are ionic. This one is ionic, metal and a nonmetal. This one is ionic, metal and a nonmetal. This one is ionic, potassium and iodine. That's an I. So all 3 of these are ionic compounds. This is a covalent compound. This is 2 nonmetals. So we know that covalent compounds have lower melting points and boiling points than ionic. If we had 2 covalent compounds, we would need to determine which of these IMFs the compounds have, because this has the lowest boiling point, this has the highest of the covalent compounds. But we didn't have 2 covalent compounds, we only had 1 covalent compound, and they always have a lower melting point than ionic compounds. Number 4, a covalent compound is formed when a reaction takes place between atoms of. So covalent means 2 nonmetals. So which of these answers has 2 nonmetals? It's C. Number 5, what is the total number of electron pairs shared between atoms in an oxygen molecule? You would need to draw an oxygen Lewis structure. The finished Lewis structure will look like that, and there are 2 pairs between them. Number 6, which Lewis structure is drawn correctly? H2. This has 2 valence electrons each hydrogen only wants 2 electrons around it. Each of these have 4 electrons, that's 2 bonds, so that is not the correct one. O2, this is 12 valence electrons. You'll have to watch the video on how to draw Lewis structures to understand that. 12 valence electrons have to be shown, and each one wants 8 around it. This is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. That's a double bond, so 12 electrons being shown. This oxygen has 8, this oxygen has 8 around it, so this is probably the correct answer. CO should have 10 valence electrons. You had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, so we know that's wrong. N2 should have 10 valence electrons. We have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, so we know that's wrong. So you have to check the valence electrons, and you have to make sure that everybody has an octet or that hydrogen has 2 electrons around it. Number 7, what is the shape of a water molecule? And you'll have Lewis structures drawn for those molecules that you need. There's a water molecule. It's 2 outside atoms, and you'll need to watch the video on shapes. 2 outside atoms, but these electrons here are going to bend these down and away so that in space it will not look as flat as it looks on paper. These electrons are going to bend these down and away, so the shape of that is going to be bent. I'm just going to do the first 9 questions in this part 1 video, and then I'll do the other questions in another video. Which element forms an ionic compound when it reacts with lithium? So ionic compound is a metal and a nonmetal. Lithium is a metal. So we're looking for a nonmetal. That eliminates those 2. These are metals. Now these 2 are nonmetals, but this one is a noble gas, and they don't form compounds for the most part. So the correct answer would be bromine. Number 9, which statement about IMFs is correct? You have to watch the video on IMFs. You have to know this information. You simply have to understand the concept of intermolecular forces. These are the strongest, these are the weakest. The weaker it is, the lower the melting point and boiling point. The stronger it is, the higher the melting point and the boiling point. Intermolecular force is what keeps 2 molecules together. So which statement about IMFs is correct? Ionic IMFs are the weakest, but create the highest melting point and boiling point. Well, the second half of that is correct. The first half is incorrect. So that is the wrong answer. Polar IMFs are stronger than hydrogen forces. That is incorrect. Hydrogen forces are stronger than polar. Nonpolar IMFs occur when you have a metal and a nonmetal. That is incorrect. That would be for ionic, metal and a nonmetal. Nonpolar forces have the lowest melting point and boiling point. That is correct. That is one of the main concepts of this unit. You must know these 4 IMFs, how to determine them, and just as importantly, what their relationship is to melting point and boiling point. The stronger the IMF, the higher the melting point and boiling point. And we'll finish up this test in part 2 of Unit 4 exam review.